Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the ASUS RX 480 STRIX OC Edition GPU. So basically just consider it a look at all of the 3-fan STRIX RX 480s. Thank you to ASUS for the card. It is on loan, and I need to return it in a working condition without volt mods hanging off of it and without it being covered in Plasti Dip. That does mean we're not going to be doing an LN2 overclocking session on the card. I might do an air-cooled or a water-cooled session with the card. Definitely going to do some BIOS modding, at least in my own time, just to see. I might release like a BuildZoid Edition RX 480 STRIX BIOS. So, yeah, that's that. Let's take a look at the card now. So this is the RX 480 STRIX. You've probably seen it before because it's been around for ages and ages and ages and ages, and it's been reviewed by pretty much everyone. So I'll try to keep this short. The shroud is plastic. This is all plastic. There's RGB lighting. We won't be going into details of that because, well, I don't care, and this is an overclocking channel, and it's not for people who care about aesthetics. Deal with it. This is the bottom edge. You have, exhaust right there for the fin stack, and you also have exhaust on the top edge. This is a very popular heatsink style. It also has one major issue. If you have the card inside your motherboard like so, right, and you have air coming out of the motherboard downwards into the motherboard as well as upwards, here you'll have a side panel. That may not be much of an issue. There is a pretty big gap for the air to travel through. Hopefully you have some decent airflow in that area. What is a problem is the air going down into the motherboard, because right there we have the PCIe slot. You can't blow through this, so there's an area here where you just can't get any airflow. That air has pretty much nowhere to go except this way. Right, because this is the only direction where there's no restriction, well, other than more PCIe slots. So it's going to end up going down this way and get kicked back up in front of these two fans. So they're going to pull that back in again, and that basically is reuse of spent air, which is normal for this heatsink design. The GTR does it. Basically every GPU ever with this heatsink design has this issue. So basically you get that, recycling of spent air, and the heatsink does perform worse because of it. So if you want to get optimum performance out of this kind of heatsink, you can gain quite a few degrees by, putting a fan sort of in this area, or, at this end of the card to blow any of the hot air that's getting stuck in front of the card this way and get fresh air in front of the card. Because the card itself is just gonna, these fans do not have a lot of power. You can see, they're thin, they're tiny. You can see, they're thin, they're tiny little fans. They do not have a lot of air moving ability. They're very good at forcing it through the heatsink, and past that they can't do anything. Plus, pull setups just generally suck. If you want to move, literally suck. If you have a pull fan, if you look at the pressure, the amount of negative pressure you get in front of a fan compared to the amount of positive pressure, very big difference. Here you have a lot of positive pressure. The amount of negative pressure you get with a fan is kind of crap, which is why you don't do, radiator pull setups. No, you don't run those if you want optimal temperature performance. You run pull if you can't do push-pull. Just generally, fans are kind of bad at pulling. It's really hard to optimize a fan design to pull well. So the end result with your GPU is that they're just going to pull in whatever air happens to accumulate in front of them, which in the case of this sort of air design, heatsink design, means everything it just dumped onto the motherboard is going to be going back into the GPU. This is really bad for your thermals, which is why I suggest the creative fan placement. So that covers that, which is mostly just be aware of this heatsink design having that issue. It's not ASUS's fault. Everybody does this. Well, everybody who uses this heatsink design. And I think for the RX 480, the only two cards that don't do this are the Sapphire Nitro and the MSI, which one of them I might be getting one of those two to play with. Either way, let's just keep moving on with this card. Here's your back plate. That lights up with RGB. This is your top edge. I've removed these because they're a pain to pull out, so I've pulled them out ahead of time, so when we take the card apart, I don't have any issues with that. Here's your I/O, 2 HDMI, 1 DVI, and 2 display ports. Not really much else to talk about. There's no BIOS switches anywhere on the card. There are voltage read and measurement points here. We will be taking a closer look at them once the heatsink is off. As you can see, there's no inscription near them. I covered these in my PCB teardown video of this card as well. We will not be looking at the PCB in super, a huge amount of detail today. We'll be mostly focusing on the heatsink. So let's pull the heatsink off, since that's what this is going to be about. The heatsink comes off with 6 screws. I will not be removing the back plate. It is not worth it. There's not really anything there. As I discovered when I shot the first version of video and forgot to press the record button. So, that saves you all some time. You still get to watch me remove 6 screws, but at least you don't see me fighting with the rest of them on this card. So there we go. For all of you interested, this card is a review sample. Well, it's a used review sample. That's why you can sort of see that the inscriptions on it are a little bit scratched up. But luckily, until I got it, nobody pulled the heatsink apart, so at least my thermal testing for stock thermal paste are completely valid as far as I'm concerned. So that's nice. And hopefully ASUS won't be too annoyed that I took apart their review sample. But I really doubt it. At least I hope they won't. But hey, easier ask forgiveness than ask permission. And I already took the card apart. They never said I couldn't take it apart, just that I can't break it. So there we go. That is the card. You have this this is not a heatsink, this metal clip thing. This is mostly to improve the rigidity of the card. And I base that off the fact that while there is a little bit, there's a thermal pad right here, and there is a thermal pad on this part, neither of those thermal pads is doing a whole lot. Well, this one's actually sort of helping that area of RAM, but that's also the area of, those are the memory ICs that sort of get the best airflow. These two are just completely uncooled. These 3 aren't cooled either. Will this have an impact on memory overclocking? I doubt it. These are Samsung memory ICs. They're generally not very temperature sensitive. Well, at least going upwards, they're not sensitive. If you try to pull them too cold, then they start complaining. But as far as getting them too hot, not really concerning. So I'm not going to have any complaints about that. But yes, this metal plate here is literally just to increase the rigidity of the card to prevent it from flexing. And I'm not going to actually try flex it, because that would fall into the potentially breaking the card category of actions. So yeah, that retention thing is there only for rigidity mostly, not really to cool the RAM. So let's talk a bit more about the heatsink. So I'm going to move that sort of there so you can look at it, and let's move on to the heatsink. VRM has active cooling for VRAM, memory controller, and the vCore. They're all cooled. The vCore isn't getting great contact, as those international rectifier 3555s are literally on the edge of that thermal pad. And really, I think this should have been shifted a few centimeters that way. But, well, at least there's a heatsink there, and it works. Well, it doesn't actually really matter if it works. This VRM is way more powerful than an RX 480 could ever need. So, I'm not even, like, if we checked the thermals and I saw 105 degrees, I wouldn't even be concerned. If I saw 120 degrees, I still wouldn't really be concerned. So, yeah, I have no complaints about that thermal pad. It's there. It might not be as efficiently placed as it could be, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it really matters. What I do think might have a few things to do with this card's thermal performance is the direct contact heat pipe design. And a lot of people are now going to shout, oh, it's not touching all the heat pipes. That's not the problem I have with it. Well, it's sort of the problem I have with it. But basically, and this time I actually, oops, don't break the card. Don't break the card. Problem I have with this heatsink here is that there we go, get a blank page, that this thing does not scale well with fan speed. By which I mean, if you hit 100% fan speed, the performance compared to, say, 35% fan speed is not a whole lot better. Well, it's a lot better than 35%, but you get the idea. Basically, I expect a big jump, in a big drop in temperatures if I put the fan speed all the way to the maximum. The STRIX doesn't really have that. And to illustrate the, I'm just going to draw two generic curves for like fan speed versus temperature. If you read the XFX RX 480 GTR review, then you know what that should look like, because that's what I use for my thermal testing as a graph. So you'll get something that looks like this with a heatsink, okay? And so you have fan speed, which here would be like 0% fan speed, here would be 100%. Here you have temperature. This would be like, say, 80 degrees, and this down here would be like 50 or 40. You can't really go below ambient, so 40, 30 degrees is really the limit. And for air coolers, the hard limit is whatever the boiling point of the whatever the fluid in the heat pipes is. You can't go below that. Because below that, the heat pipes stop working. So you're limited by the boiling point of the heat pipe fluid, which is what we're going to get to soon enough. So if we have this curve, right, then let's say this is like the curve of the, and I'm going to put it the right way up, say the GTR. And if you were to, so let's say this was the GTR curve, if you were to just, ignore maximum and minimum temperatures for the GTR and the STRIX, well, actually maximum temperature, so I'm going to plot them against each other. The STRIX curve looks a lot like this. It's a lot less curved, right? And that leads me to think that there is a issue, and I really need to do something about that glare. There is an issue with this sort of heat pipe layout, because that basically means, because the fan speed for both cards is the same. This card has a bigger fin stack. This card also has more fans on it. This card, theoretically, should have way better cooling performance, but obviously, it's not dropping temperatures as quickly as the GTR. Why is that? Well, I'm going to investigate that, but I'm going to also tell you what I think is happening right here, right now, because, well, yeah. So yeah, and other than that, this specific sample is actually, the STRIX I have starts a few degrees above the GTR. So if you took that curve and moved it like to here, like just move it by like, actually, yeah, move it like 5 degrees up at every point, or, well, actually here the movement up gets worse. So towards the like maximum cooling performance, the GTR really, really wins. But at low fan speed, the GTR is not that much better. And I think that's mostly because this GPU core right here that I got, this right here pulls a lot more power than my GTR does. And I think that's just random luck of the sample. This is a crappy RX 480 sample. It doesn't overclock very well. It runs pretty hot. It does come with a really low stock voltage of 1.075 volts, but it still runs really hot. So I guess it's leaky as hell. And it reads a really high power draw rating in GPU-Z. And that rating, like, while I don't like relying on software ratings, for the International Rectifier 3567B, I tend to trust it. It's not that far off what you'd actually end up, like, it's not that horrifically wrong that you couldn't say like, if you have two GPUs with the same voltage controllers, then you can sort of go like, yeah, it's going to be similar, kind of close in terms of readings. So this card seems to pull about 20 watts more than my GTR, and my GTR is a stellar example of an RX 480. That thing is top 5% at the very, very least. This would be, I think, slightly below average for overclocking capabilities and thermal properties. So I think that would account for why this heatsink just, even with this heatsink, the card runs hotter, even at low fan speeds. But the weird heatsink curve, which is very flat, I think is more due to this heat pipe design. So basically, as long as you're at high temperatures, this heatsink works fine. If you're in the 70 degrees, I don't really see an issue with the heatsink. As you try to crank up the heatsink a lot past that, it doesn't get a lot colder. And the reason for that, I think, is that these heat pipes, especially this one down here, basically, so this one down here, which is the 6th one. So this is a 6mm, and these other 4 are 8mm, and so there's 5 heat pipes here total, which is also more than the GTR, and the GTR has smaller heat pipes across the board. It has less heat pipes, they're smaller, and somehow it gets better thermals. Part of that's going to be the GPU core power draw, part of that's going, but the curve is nicer on the GTR, so I'm going to blame the heat pipes for the curve here. Or it could be the thermal paste. The thermal paste could also screw up the curve, but mostly I think it's the heat pipes, because the problem with heat pipes is they don't work below a certain temperature. If you know how heat pipes work, then you know that there is a fluid inside heat pipes that boils at a very low temperature. We're talking 40 to 50 degrees centigrade. When that fluid boils, it travels down the heat pipe and into, you get that fog, essentially, mist, that vapor. Yes, you get that vapor, and that vapor travels through the heat pipe, and this part of the heat pipe is a lot colder than this part of the heat pipe. Right here, it's like 70 degrees. Here, it's going to be like 30, 40 degrees. It's being cooled by 20, 25 degree ambient air, 30 degree ambient air, 35 degree ambient air. So here, it's a lot colder. So what ends up happening here, the vapor condenses back into liquid, and there is a wick inside the heat pipe, which is either serrations in the heat pipe surface, so very fine channels, and the liquid basically just through surface tension travels up that. Not surface tension, capillary action, which I do believe is a side effect of surface tension. I have no idea. I'd have to check that right now. Been a long while since I've last cared about heat sinks this much. Anyway, the liquid goes back to the GPU core and it gets heated up again and goes around. But the problem is, if this area doesn't go above the boiling point of the liquid, well, the heat pipe doesn't actually work except for the copper inside the heat pipe. So for this middle heat pipe, right, and these two heat pipes in the middle of the core, which have really good contact with it, these two heat pipes right here, I'm not really concerned. If this GPU core is at 60 degrees, those two heat pipes are going to be almost certainly at 60 degrees in that area, and therefore they will be working at optimum efficiency because, well, the liquid is boiling, it's traveling, and it's going through. But this 6mm down here is only getting heat transferred to it through its neighboring heat pipes. And I'm not going to say heat pipes have terrible thermal conductivity properties. I'm not sure how good they are across each other. But I do suspect that this heat pipe could be, say, 10 degrees colder than these two in the middle. And if this one is 10 degrees colder and the GPU core is at 60 degrees, and this heat pipe is hovering around 50 degrees, which let's say that was the boiling point of the liquid inside it, well, that liquid isn't going to be boiling very much, and that heat pipe is pretty much useless. So you end up losing thermal performance, you end up losing, heat sink capabilities as your core temperature goes down, which is why I think the curve is so flat, because at some point, more air is just disables several of your heat pipes, and you're stuck relying on these two, and maybe this third one down here. So sort of these 4 heat pipes have actual contact to the core, so you'd only be relying on these 4, and this one really doesn't have that great contact either. So, I really suspect that some of these heat pipes just at lower temperatures don't work. At higher temperatures, this heatsink actually performs fine, but at lower temperatures, it sort of sucks. So, I do have a way to test this. What I intend to do is I'm going to put thermal probes on all of the heat pipes because, yeah, I'm not going to just, make a claim and make you run with it. No, I will test this. So right now, don't blame the heat pipes. I just suspect it's the heat pipes, okay? I hate people witch hunting, it's like, oh no, the heat pipes are arranged. No, I haven't tested it. I have no idea. I suspect it is. Okay, it's a suspicion, not a truth. So my plan is to test if the temperatures of the heat pipes sort of in this area. I'll try to get it as close to the GPU core as possible as far as the thermal probe goes, but I will be having difficulty with, heat traveling through the heat pipes as I pile stuff onto them, because basically anything I try to attach to those heat pipes that isn't air is going to improve their thermal conductivity between each other. Even freaking plastic tape has better thermal conductivity than air. So if these heat pipes are having a hard time pushing heat between each other, then anything I add is going to improve that. So that could skew the results a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. But if I manage to somehow mount thermocouples to the individual heat pipes and just the heat pipes, then I should be able to basically tell you exactly what temperature each heat pipe is at, depending on GPU core temperature, and then we can figure out, well, maybe this heat pipe literally hits like 40 degrees when the core is at 60, which means that heat pipe reasonably can't be expected to actually do anything because the liquid in it can't boil, which would explain why the heatsink doesn't really benefit from cranking up the fan speed so high, which is annoying because if you're overclocking, you're really, like, if you're doing air-cooled, benchmarking, and, which is the short-term sessions, you don't care about noise. You're going to slam that fan speed, and this heatsink at 100% fan speed just does not deliver a lot of performance. It's fine at up to like 50%, but, at 100% fan speed, the performance is not that much better. It doesn't really improve. You get stuck in relatively high temperatures very early. So I need to test, that's just sort of that. And that sort of concludes my analysis of this card. And that took way too long in my opinion. Anyway, if you didn't get anything in the video, well, you can complain about not getting it in the comments. If you feel I should have talked about something else in this video about the card, you can complain in the comments. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments. Oh, I already said that, didn't I? Well, okay, so that's all the things you can put in the comments. There's a like button, you can go hit that. There's a dislike button, you can also go hit that, because apparently neither of them does anything. There's a subscribe button if you're not a subscriber, and you should press that button because you definitely want to hear more of my voice and see more of my face, and don't actually care about all the GPUs I'm tearing down. What else was there? Right. And I keep forgetting this, but I do have a Patreon, so if you would like to help out the channel, there is a Patreon link. Well, there's a link to a page which has a link to the Patreon, because that page is supposed to sort of be all the support stuff, but stuff happened, and I need to sort some stuff out, and then that page will actually work properly. But yeah, there's a link to the page that links to the Patreon, and you can go there. Or you can just search actually Hardcore Overclocking on Patreon. No, Buildzoid. You have to search Buildzoid on Patreon. I should do something about the whole Buildzoid and actually Hardcore Over. Actually, I think you'd find both. Both should turn up. So just go to Patreon and you get the idea. Anyway, that's that for this video. And should I see you guys next time? Oh, right, wait. One last announcement. There will be a live stream this Saturday, 7 p.m. GMT. Unless the time zone of the UK has recently changed, which I should have checked before I made this announcement. So, plus 7 GMT plus minus 1 hour, because I have no idea what time zone I'm on currently. Good job, me. And yeah, there will be a live stream. And that live stream will be with that GTX 570, with that E-Power hanging off of it, and with that tank of liquid nitrogen, and that tank of liquid nitrogen, and basically I probably won't run out of liquid nitrogen because I suspect it will stop working before that happens, but you get the idea. GPUs, E-Powers, liquid nitrogen, fun! And now, see you guys next time. Now I need to